On behalf of King County, Washington, the Wilson Sheehan Lab for Economic Opportunities in Notre Dame, and JPAL North America, give everybody a big welcome. I'm Carrie Cihak. I'm King County's Evidence and Impact Officer, and I'm really passionate about advancing racial equity through bringing together the expertise of our staff, our research partners, and our community. And I remain completely committed to that mission. Evidence Matters is a partnership between King County LEO, which is the Lab for Economic Opportunities at Notre Dame, and JPAL. And we're all organizations that are working in complementary ways to fight poverty and increase access to economic opportunity. I'm here with my co-host, Vincent Quan.
Hi, Carrie. Very glad to be here.
We've built this partnership around Evidence Matters to really focus on three purposes. So first, we want to share the knowledge that we're building from our learning partnerships, so we can use that knowledge to advance better and equitable outcomes in our communities and in communities across the United States. We want to celebrate our successes, and we want to share and get some help with our challenges. And we want to build a connection with all of you who are joining in from around the country so that we can learn from one another. Today, we're going to dive into some really compelling data on economic mobility from Opportunity Insights, which is a research group based at Harvard University. And we have with us David Forte.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Forte. As Carrie said, I'm with Opportunity Insights.
David is the Director of Research, Translation, and Strategic Initiatives at Opportunity Insights. So we're really excited to have him lead us through some of the major lessons that they have learned from decades of research on this topic of economic mobility. We have with us Elsa Batrasboni and Aaron Garcia.
My name is Elsa Batrasboni. I'm the Director of Communities of Opportunity. And I am very happy to be here with my colleague here, Aaron.
Aaron Garcia, I'm also excited to be here.
It's so great to have you. I think everyone hearing about your work, it's really going to bring some life to the data about how in local ways we can really invest in community power and community-led solutions. I wanted to acknowledge that there's uncertainty and fear that many of our communities are feeling right now. And I know for some of us, like a conversation about economic mobility may be somewhat futile, but I just want to impart that what's occurring at the federal level doesn't change what we know about what works, and it doesn't change what the needs of our communities are. We cannot be distracted from our commitment to ensure that we are creating welcoming communities for everyone. And at a local government level here in King County, we're going to stay focused on advancing equity and building and using evidence to do that. I hope we're going to bring a little bit of hope into the conversation today.
Yes, we still have the ability to make a huge difference at the local level, and many of the best ideas that we've across the country have been driven by community-based organizations in partnerships with local governments. David, why don't we start by having you tell us a little bit more about Opportunity Insights and the work that you do there?
We are a research and policy lab based at Harvard University that studies economic mobility. And we do so using a big data approach. So we have unique data sharing partnerships with the US Census, US Treasury, as well as private sector groups like Facebook and Meta, which allow our team to analyze millions of data points to understand what economic mobility looks like across America, the factors that contribute most to creating opportunity, and also look at how it's changing over time. Our goal at Opportunity Insights is to really understand what works to enable economic mobility, particularly for people from underrepresented backgrounds who opportunity has been lacking most, and ensure that that evidence is used to inform policy and programs across the US. So today we're going to focus on three key themes. The first is focusing on that childhood environment. Place really plays a big role in shaping adulthood outcomes. The second is investing in social capital, and a particular kind of social capital here. We're talking about economic connectedness, which is the extent to which we see cross-class interaction happening in communities. And the third is around targeting social communities to improve outcomes. And so we'll talk more about what those social communities mean and how they can shape mobility outcomes.
David, let's start with just trying to understand, what do we mean by economic mobility and how are you all measuring it?
So level setting on what we mean when we talk about economic mobility. Imagine, if you will, just a single household. What we do in terms of measuring economic mobility to start is to look at the parental household income. And so here we have a little line graph to show what the income distributions might look like across America. And you'll start with a singular parent, and they happen to be, in this instance, a low-income family. And what we do to be able to measure mobility for their children, we're talking about an intergenerational change. So we take that forward and look at the outcomes of those children who grew up in that particular household from a particular household income perspective. And we see 28 to 35 years or so in the future what their incomes are in adulthood themselves. So that could go up, that could go down. And to do this at scale, we talked about the types of data partnerships that we have with Census and Treasury. We do this millions of times. So we replicate this in the data over and over again until we can really map back to the neighborhood level what those outcomes for low-income children look like on average across the United States.
David, it's remarkable how you've been able to look at all of this data to really compare trends from when a person is in adulthood relative to their income when they were children. Can you talk a little bit about how this varies from place to place across the United States?
Yes, sorry. The map we're showing here, this looks exactly at what we just talked about. So we're seeing here the average household income in adulthood at age 35 for children whose parents were low income. In this case, that means they earned around $27,000 or so in household income each year. And importantly, I think in setting the stage, we're controlling for household income. So the incomes that we're showing here on this map are representative of children who shared similar financial circumstances when they grew up. And what we're doing in measuring these incomes in adulthood is mapping them back to the places that they spent the most time growing up as children. So we can really start to see the impact of place in terms of how that shapes adulthood outcomes. And broadly here, we can see from a coloration standpoint, the redder areas of the US tend to offer lower-income children lower opportunity in terms of their incomes in adulthood, and the blue-green areas tend to offer much higher opportunity. And so there's broad variation that we can see regionally across the United States.
Yeah, so David, let me make sure I'm understanding this map. If I think about myself, I grew up in the southeast corner of South Dakota, similar to Dubuque. So basically, my data point is in South Dakota, even though I now live in Seattle. And that little dark blue color of where I live means that on average, me and my peers are earning, we'll use Dubuque as the example, about $45,000 a year if we grew up as kids who were in families whose parents were earning about $27,000 a year when we were children. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So again, controlling for that household income. So we're looking just at the outcomes of those kids from low-income families themselves and what they were able to earn relative to their parents.
Right. And then, so if you were a child for lower income families with children, like in Georgia, for example, predominantly red on this map, those kids are growing up to actually probably earn less than their parents. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's some parts of the US in the Southeast in particular, take Charlotte, for example, where kids are growing up in households, again, earning around $27,000 in household income. And we're actually seeing some decline in mobility for those kids on average, earning $26,000 in adulthood themselves.
I think it's just an interesting exercise for folks on this call after the session to even take a look at where they grew up to see what mobility trends have looked like in the region that they grew up in.
Yeah, in that vein, I'm really curious to look at King County because I know we have quite a few people from King County here. So how much does it vary? Oh, yeah, look, like even within a region, it varies quite a bit.
It does, yeah. So those national trends that we see, or we're just looking at, they continue to appear when we zoom in locally. So when we were looking at that national map, we were looking at geographic units of commuting zones, so a collection of counties that represent a broader metro area. Here we're able to zoom in, again, because of the nature of the big data that our team works with, we can zoom in and look at what's happening census tract by census tract. So areas where we have about 4,000 or so people living, really looking at the neighborhood impacts. And so you'll notice on the right here, the scale itself has not changed. So it's still the same scale we were looking at on the national map. And you can see that same spectrum of outcomes that are occurring within a place that has in Seattle, where we saw a relatively strong opportunity for children from low-income families. It depends a lot on where you grow up. So you can see even within a mile or two radius, depending on which side of the street, which apartment complex a kid happens to grow up in, which schools that leads them to attend, the local impact of neighborhoods has a tremendous effect on outcomes later in life.
David, you touched on the importance of where kids grew up, but we of course know that families also move and children also move when they're growing up. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection and the relation of whether or not a child moves to a higher opportunity neighborhood and what that does in terms of their economic opportunity and mobility later on in adulthood?
Yeah, so the outcomes we're looking at on the screen, those are representative of where children spent the most time. So if the child spends, half of their childhood in a particular neighborhood, we attribute half of their income to that particular census tract and so on. So it's meant to represent the places where children spent the most time growing up. But as you said, Vincent, children do move, families move quite a bit. And so we were able to study what does it look like in terms of finding opportunity or moving to opportunity. So take, for example, these two adjacent neighborhoods here. I think we have Arbor Heights and West White Center area. We were able to look at these moves in a really rich way. So we could say, what happens if we have a family with a 2-year-old that moves from Arbor Heights to West White Center, from a red area to a blue area on the map? How does that impact their incomes in adulthood? And what we see is a dosage effect, essentially. So the earlier a child moves from a lower to a higher opportunity area, the more their incomes in adulthood look like that higher opportunity area. So it's not that a move later on in life doesn't have an impact, it just doesn't have as much of an impact as if you were to spend your entire childhood in a higher opportunity area.
And David, can we dig into that term higher opportunity area a little bit? So I think we colloquially might understand what a higher opportunity neighborhood is, but how do you all define a higher opportunity neighborhood at Opportunity Insights? What are some of the underlying characteristics of that?
Yeah, exactly. So there's 4 that we call out in particular that are associated with these higher opportunity areas. So the first is lower poverty rates. So lower poverty concentration within a neighborhood tends to matter quite a bit. More stable family structures, so the increased presence of 2-parent households within a region. Not so much that your own household as a child has 2 parents, but that the broader community that you're associated with has an elevated proportion of 2-parent households. Better school quality, both in terms of K-12 and then access to post-secondary options. And then the final one being greater social capital. And we talked a bit about this at the intro, but in particular, the extent to which we see cross-class interactions happening.
I would really love for us to dive more into greater social capital. How much does that actually impact economic mobility?
Yeah, so this last one is particularly important. In fact, it's the most predictive indicator that our team has found in terms of what we can say about predicting economic mobility within a place. And so when we talk about economic connectedness, we decompose this into two factors. So the first being exposure. And this is the extent to which we have high and low income folks in the same place with one another. Do we have income segregation within a place, essentially? And the second half of that is what we call friending bias or friending. And this is just defined as conditional on that exposure. So given that we have a certain mix of high and low income folks in a place together, what's the likelihood that they form meaningful relationships with one another? So to have high levels of economic connectedness, which we associate quite a bit with higher levels of economic mobility, you have to have both of these things. We have another tool called the Social Capital Atlas that really allows you to dig into what economic connectedness and other measures of social capital look like across America. So on the left-hand side here, we have the same map we looked at earlier. So this is mapping the geography of opportunity down to the county level. And then on the right here, we have an additional map that maps the concept of economic connectedness.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, there's no fancy chart needed here to show like the correlations, right? Like these look very similar, and I think if we didn't label them, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell the difference. So this is just to underscore again that economic connectedness is extremely predictive of upward levels of economic
Amazing.
mobility.
And can you explain that concept of economic connectedness just one more time? What does that really mean there?
It's again the extent to which high and low income folks are in the same place with one another and that they're forming meaningful relationships with one another. So we have to have socioeconomic integration, and then once that happens, that we actually see friendships forming and not people just associating with folks that have similar backgrounds and look like them. Yeah.
And it's across those different economic backgrounds.
Exactly.
Amazing. So I'd love to again look at what does this look like in King County? How does that compare at the neighborhood level in King County?
Yeah, and so similar to the maps on mobility that we looked at, we can zoom in locally to understand what economic connectedness looks like in any community. And we see similar patterns when you zoom into metro areas, right? This is at the national level, we see similarities. At the local level, we also see similarities. Again, those two concepts map one side by side here, where we see higher levels of economic mobility. We also tend to see higher levels of economic connectedness. The blues and reds here matched across the two. And when you dig into King County a bit more, unpacking those two concepts individually in the social capital atlas itself, you'll see that it's actually friending in the Seattle King County area, the friending bias that tends to be pops a bit more on the colors. If you're from the King County area, you're probably familiar with the socioeconomic integration that happens in the area. There's lots of high income and low income folks in the same places with one another. But when you dig into this deeper, it's actually the friending bias that tends to be a bit lower in these areas. So folks associating with people that tend to look like them from an income perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, so I'd like to just dig in a little bit on, so what is it about this economic connectedness that's relating to economic mobility? I can think about my own experience being exposed to, I had a lot of my peers where the expectation was we were all going to go to college, exposure to lots of different kinds of careers. Is that what we think some of the drivers are? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's it. And our team is still really trying to understand the underlying mechanisms behind economic connectedness. But our hunch is that it is those types of things, right? When you have exposure to folks from different backgrounds, if as a young person, if you're never around people who are doctors who have gone to college, right, then you don't necessarily see that as a pathway for yourself. If you're at the point at which you're trying to go get a job and you don't have that particular referral or connection point that could help you land that job, right? I think those types of things, the mentorship components, these are the things we're looking at in that data and really trying to unpack what is it about this connection piece that matters most in terms of shaping economic mobility.
Yeah, David, that makes a lot of intuitive sense to me too. So many kids from higher income backgrounds often take for granted that they can tap into these informal networks of mentors or peers for guidance. For example, even thinking about the value of an internship or how to apply to an internship. But many kids from lower income backgrounds don't necessarily have those peer networks or networks of mentors that they can tap into to gain exposure to some of these ideas. So I think this theme around economic connectedness makes a lot of sense really intuitively and just even based on my own personal lived experience. So to recap this, we've defined economic mobility and looked at how it really varies from place to place in the United States, both across big regions like the South versus the Midwest, but also the variation that can often happen at a hyper local level across neighborhoods. How kids in adjacent neighborhoods can grow up with very different experiences and outcomes. And we've also been able to explore some of the factors that lead kids to do better off in adulthood and having exposure to opportunity-rich neighborhoods early in life, and then the real importance of social capital that you emphasized just now. And so, David, some of Opportunity Insight's newer data has looked at how that has changed over time. And kids born in the 1990s experiencing opportunity relative to kids that were born in the 1970s. And I know that in popular discussion, there is this common perception that life just has become a lot harder. It's a lot harder for the folks that are born in this generation to move up to the next economic rung. But what has your data actually been showing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think one of the challenges in studying economic mobility is that you just have to wait, right? You have to wait until those children reach adulthood to be able to measure their incomes and understand what their incomes are in adulthood. And so when we looked at this concept initially, the maps we just looked at around what the geography of opportunity looks like, those were published back in 2018. And at that time, we were really only able to look at the experience of kids who were born in and around 1980 or so. And just through the gift of time, this past summer, we were able to release somewhat of an update to that research. So we were comparing the differences between kids born in 1978 and kids born in 1992. And the question there was really trying to understand, can places and opportunity within places shift in policy relevant time periods within a generation or so? Or are these much more static constructs, right? Is opportunity fixed within the bounds of geography? To what extent can we see place-based change? And when in looking at that, the research we did this past summer, we were able to look at the differences between those two time periods, but also look at the differences by race. And the biggest changes that we saw in that analysis were for low-income white and low-income Black Americans. So I'll share a bit of data now that kind of unpacks what those two experiences look like across those times. So first, we'll look at a map for children born in 1978. Similar kind of construction here. The kids growing up in low-income families and measuring their income again in adulthood. So this looks very similar to the maps we were just looking at nationally. And then again, through the gift of time, we were able to fast forward this to children also born in 1992. And so what we see here in these maps is that there's a spreading of the red areas of the map in the 1992. We see opportunity receding in a lot of places across the country for low-income white children. And so places along the coast in 1978, where we saw San Francisco, for instance, where you grew up, Vincent, offered relatively strong opportunity for low-income children. And now we see those areas of the country starting to, recede and offer a bit less in this next generation.
Wow, that's stunning. So let me make sure I'm understanding. So these are maps looking just at white children of low income parents. And so the fact that there's more red on the map for kids born in 1992 means that relative to kids born in 1978, the kids born in 1992 aren't doing as well relative to their parents among these low income white children. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you took a national average of what opportunity looked like for low-income white children, it
Yeah.
declined between this time period.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So that kind of tracks with a lot of the, I don't know, narrative we hear. Is that story the same for like Black kids as well?
So I mentioned that the biggest changes we saw were between that of low-income white and low-income Black children. So this is the experience again that we saw for low-income white children. If we shift those maps to just look at the experience of low-income Black children, first thing you'll notice is there's a lot of the country that is just hatched here in black and white, and that just represents areas where we don't have enough data on the population to be able to map that. But we've also shifted the color scale here, so purplish areas represent lower, and the kind of salmon orange areas represent higher levels of opportunity. So this is what the map looks like for kids born in 1978. And as we move that forward, what we see is the opposite trend. So areas that were purple, offering lower opportunity for low-income Black children, improved pretty much across the board. So we saw an improvement in opportunity and economic mobility for low-income Black children across these two time periods.
And then David, the question I have is, okay, so over time, Black kids are doing relative, or at least Black kids with low income parents are doing relatively better than they were in previous generations. But what about that opportunity gap that we know exists between white kids and Black kids? Is that still there, or what's going on there?
It's super important point. It's as though you predicted the slides I'm going to show you, Carrie. So we know we talked about how that color scale changed, right, from what we saw before, the red to blues. Note that it was much higher to start with, right? 30,000 was the low point, 18,000 was the low point here. So these are two different color scales for a reason. And if we move forward here, looking at the outcomes of these children, Black and white, in 1992, what we see is that the color scale is intentional because there's virtually no place in America where low-income Black children on average go on to earn as much as their low-income white peers. even though we saw improvements in the economic mobility outcomes for low-income Black children relative to the declines in low-income white children, there still remains a tremendous gap between what a low-income Black child on average is able to achieve relative to their low-income white peers.
Gotcha. So Black children are doing better over time, but still haven't closed that opportunity gap.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what about, again, I'm going to ask, what about in King County? What's the data looking like there?
Yeah, so we can quickly look here. Because of the more granular kind of looking at two different time periods by race, we weren't able to disaggregate quite at such a granular level as the neighborhood, but here we can look at county differences across the entirety of the US. So looking at Washington State, King County obviously included in that, we can do a similar exercise. So here we're looking at the experience of low-income white children, and you can see that similar pattern of kind of increasing red, lower opportunity in the later cohort. And the same experience for low-income Black children, we see increasing kind of salmon peach color, meaning increased opportunity, better economic mobility outcomes for low-income Black children. So the trends we saw nationally, and again, the income gap that still persists, the trend that we saw nationally really plays out also at the local level here.
Interesting. Though in King County itself, it looks like white kids stayed about the same.
They did, yeah. And so it's you're able to really, we focused on Black and white children, but you're able to disaggregate this across the entirety of the race spectrum that we have available to us in the census data. And so within the greater Seattle area, you can see here that white children saw a decrease from 34.4K to 33.4K in average household income. So there's not a huge change there, but this varies county by county. And so you're able to unpack this data by race and by gender to really see what's happening in your local community.
Right.
David, this data that you've been showing here, if folks were interested in actually taking a look at it afterwards, would they be able to go on the Opportunity Insights website to pull some of this information?
Yeah, exactly. And maybe someone can drop the link in the chat here, but the opportunityatlas.org, you can look at both the neighborhood level data in what we call module 1 of the tool, and then these county level trends in module 2. And so you can go in and explore similar to the way you would navigate Google Maps. You type in your location, it'll take you where you want to go, and you can see how these outcomes look for your own community.
Great. Thanks, David. So, David, to wrap up this part of the conversation, all of us here are really interested in figuring out what can we actually do or invest in order to drive economic opportunity. So after looking at all of this data, and specifically here in King County, what do you think we've learned in terms of what's driving some of the changes in opportunity over time? And what does that imply in terms of where we should be focusing our efforts and attention? And I think this is particularly relevant to local leaders and community-based organizations that are trying to drive some of this positive change.
Yeah. So I think similar to how we talked about moving from a lower to a higher opportunity area at the census tract level and the impact that has on children's outcomes, I think we can think of it in a similar way here, but just that growing up in a thriving community in general, where we see parents that are employed, that have good health conditions, that have strong prospects, when those communities tend to have more of those features, when we see changes in a positive direction there, we also tended to see changes in a positive direction for economic mobility outcomes. Think of it as shifting that initial map from a deep red to a lighter blue. And when kids grew up in that lighter blue versus that deeper red, they tended to have stronger outcomes. And we use parental employment rates as a proxy for that broader community condition. But I think you can think more broadly about what does it mean to have a thriving community. Employment is certainly a key factor of that. There's much more healthcare, access to quality early childhood education to allow you to be able to pursue that job as a parent. And when your social community that you're exposed to as a child, the families, the parents that you interact with, and in our data, we find that happens to be folks who tend to share similar backgrounds. So people of the same race, the same socioeconomic class. When those folks saw improvements or declines, so too did the direction of their economic mobility outcomes. So just the idea of a thriving community is just super important. And this brings us beyond just thinking about the neighborhood as the unit of analysis, but really the social community that children are exposed to within a particular neighborhood that they grow up in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, David. I feel like you really lived up to your title of research translation. I feel
Wonderful.
like I've come away really, really understanding a lot of this. So thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that's great. And just to wrap it up, these again are the three kind of themes that we've found to be most impactful right now in terms of changing mobility outcomes, focusing on that childhood environment, investing in social capital and economic connectedness, and then looking at the social community that children are exposed to.
It's so great. So great. And Vincent, I feel like there really is a hopeful message here that these community level interventions can make a difference in advancing economic opportunity.
Absolutely. I share that same sentiment. And I think the data that David presented really presents that same story that we can make an impact at a more local level, especially if we target the things that ultimately matter at the local level. Some of these conditions
Yeah.
really identified. So thank you for that, David. And thank you for giving us a bit of a hopeful and data-driven message that we can base some of these conclusions on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I will just mention too, I know at JPAL, for example, Vincent, you all have invested in developing a learning agenda around economic mobility. So that's a great resource for communities. Our partners who we work very closely with at Results for America have also created this incredible economic mobility catalog, and we'll provide links. That economic mobility catalog from Results for America gathers the evidence base on a broad range of strategies that communities can employ to help foster economic mobility. And I feel like those themes that David brought forward, it's a perfect segue to the next part of our conversation and is really a validation for the work that we're doing in King County with Best Starts for Kids. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, so I'd really love to hear more about what you all are doing in King County specifically to work on some of these issues. So maybe we can.
Yeah. Let's dive in. So I'm really excited to highlight King County's Communities of Opportunity Initiative, and you're going to hear us refer to it as COO. And COO is part of King County's Best Starts for Kids work. And to give you just a little background, Best Starts for Kids is a voter-approved initiative in King County that ensures that every child here grows up healthy, happy, safe, and thriving. And of course, that means that Best Starts for Kids it includes a lot of supports for individual families and their kids, things like home visiting support for new moms, screening and treatment for kids' mental health, employment supports for young people with disabilities. There's a whole range of those kind of individual level interventions. But as our discussions just showed, we know that kids can't grow up healthy unless the communities that they grow up in are also thriving. And it was that evidence that really was the genesis of Communities of Opportunity. And Communities of Opportunity is a way for King County to partner with the communities, with our communities where the needs are greatest, to drive the change that those communities themselves envision.
So I'm really excited to hear more about this work that's happening on the ground. So let's bring in Elsa and Aron into this conversation. Elsa, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Communities of Opportunity?
Thank you, and hi again. Yeah, my name is Elsa Batres-Boni. I'm the Director for Communities of Opportunity. I am even more excited to have heard this term research translator, because isn't all those terms that we are wanting to hear sometimes when we talk about our work, and there's data, there's evidence that our work has an impact, and I'm just excited to share it. And I think we have some slides. We just want to help everyone follow our conversation. And what I'd like to share with you is I think we're going to start with the COO one first. We're in King County. This is a map of King County. And COO is like you said, Carrie, it's a public-private partnership between King County, which is the local government, Seattle Foundation, which is a local philanthropic organization, and the community. And together, we work together to improve community conditions by investing in community power. We can create change in health, economic opportunities, housing, and community connection. we can have a county where all people can be healthy, self-determined, and thriving. That's our mission.
So also, I love that term, investing in community power. Could you help us think about how or what that means to you as an organization, investing in community power?
Yeah, that's one of our core concepts and what drives a lot of our work. COO defines community power as the capacity of marginalized communities to transform the systems and conditions needed to have a healthy and self-determined and thriving life. And we believe that with this, what we mean is that we believe that we must make communities stronger by investing in that capacity, in that power. Because when we invest in that power, we're investing in the capacity of growth of those communities who are most impacted by unjust systems. And those who are closer to the problems are also closer to the solutions. And so we believe that by investing in capacity, in their capacity to come together to collectively identify solutions, then we will be investing in that change for long term.
Yeah, and Elsa, can you dive a bit more into how King County and our partners go about doing that? What's the strategy behind that? Give us some more of the detail.
Yeah, this is great. Because COO believes that communities understand their own strengths and also understand and have their best solutions, we invest in that community power. And we have 3 ways in which we do that. We have these 3 initiatives. I think we can move to the next slide that shows that we have our place and cultural-based community partnerships. We invest also in community-led systems and policy change work. And we also invest in a learning community, which is providing learning community opportunities for communities that make community infrastructure stronger and also build skills and support pilot innovative community solutions. And because we know that the systems and conditions needed to be changed take time, we are in the business of providing funding, long-term funding for this community partners.
Yeah, that's great. I think one of CO's real strengths is that we invested in these kinds of partnerships from the very beginning of the initiative, like even predating the voter approval of funding that supports COO. We had started working on this with the Seattle Foundation, but really from the get-go, invested in doing that with communities. So can you talk a little bit about that, about it's a unique set of partners and governance that I think folks would be interested in hearing about?
Yeah, I think that the mission of COO, Communities of Opportunity, are reflected in how we do the work as well as what we do. And this is why it's unique, rich, sometimes complex, but successful after all. For instance, that decision to invest in these 3 strategies, the partnerships, systems and policy change, and learning opportunities, came out of getting together with community leaders, local government, and local philanthropy at that time. I know I've seen your name in many documents, Carrie, at that time. And they came together to discuss and identify what problems they were seeing, and then coming together to define the strategies together. Because and at that time, they believed and had this long-term vision that if we were working together, we were going to be impacting longer and deeper. And in summary, when CO came together, they came to the conclusion that in order to create that long-term, we were going to invest in these 3 strategies. We were going to commit to work together to find funding to support long-term, and that we were also going to be creating a unique decision-making body, which is our governance group. And this is also a unique way of doing this work and creating impact to improve the community conditions, which is, it's a way in which to not only make decisions, space, not only for community to have a space to make decisions, but also check in and see how are we doing. So our governance group is basically made out of funded and current funded partners. We also have sponsors and representatives from the Seattle Foundation, as well as from the county, and of course, other community leaders. And so together, this is the governance group that creates and helps drive where the initiative is going to go.
Great. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper and hear about the work on the ground. For example, how you and Arun have worked together in the White Center area of King County, just south of Seattle, as we saw in the maps that David had presented. How has COO worked to improve community conditions generally and in the White Center area in particular?
Yeah, I saw some questions in the chat about how these initiatives can help and can a nonprofit do this work. And we know that an organization cannot do it alone. You need the support, and this support, the way in which COO is offering is through this partnership, right? And I am very lucky to say that I'm seeing now the seeds planted by COO since 2014, when it started. I get to see this result of work of those who believe in this long-term vision, that includes some of those results right now include affordable housing, occasional business support, creation of spaces for meaningful strategic social connection. And here today, I'm here to share this space with a beautiful example of one of our first CO's investments, the White Hub, which basically was Ines, and Aaron will talk more about us, but it's a partnership. It was a partnership between 6 community organizations that over 3 years, more or less, came together to identify their community needs and priorities. And during this time, they designed and developed program solutions. And in that process, they came up with a plan. And I'm very excited to share this space with Aaron because COO was involved in funding not the capital for this new hub that's going to be built and open in only 5 months from now, but we provided that support for those community groups to come together to do that, to build that, what we call community power, that capacity to identify their issues, prioritize them, and also come up with their solutions. And so I'm just very excited to share because now we have this new hub that it broke ground last year. And now it's going to be opening. Aaron, who is not only a funded partner, but is currently one of our newest governance group members, and he's here to talk about this program. And
That's very exciting, and congratulations on breaking ground last year on such a major initiative. So, Aaron, I think that's a really nice opportunity for you to share a bit more about what the vision of the White Center Hub is and what you all focus on. So, we'll take it away.
Sounds great. The White Center Hub is both a vision and a reality shaped directly by us, the White Center community. It represents hope, unity, and belonging. This project is not just a building, it's not just a physical structure, but it's a supportive ecosystem where working families can access both affordable housing and essential services. As a lifelong White Center resident, I can say firsthand the hub is developed by and for White Center residents. I think it's a true reflection of our community priorities and goals. Even though we got funded by COO like 6-7 years ago, this has actually been like 22 years in the making of hearing our community advocate for resources like this. So even though we broke ground last spring and we're going to complete it this fall, this has been a long time coming. And this building, the community center, is going to feature programs like boosting early learning literacy for school readiness for immigrant and refugee families. We're going to have a federally qualified health clinic that's going to provide both medical and dental. We're going to have behavioral health services for young people, a community hall that can host up to 200 plus people. We're going to have a makerspace and a recording studio for young adults. And I haven't even talked about the 76 affordable housing units that are located adjacent to this, next to a transit, that it's also going to be homes for affordable homes for individuals and families earning between 30 and 60% AMI. And I just believe this approach ensures that the hub will serve as a cornerstone for health, housing, economic opportunity, and community engagement for White Center.
Aaron, that's fantastic. And I think this really is a good example of a community-driven initiative where there really was demand from the community for a resource in a community center like this. And at the same time, it lines up nicely with what David had presented earlier about focusing on building thriving communities overall and really approaching that in a very comprehensive and holistic kind of way. Aaron, could you talk a little bit about how COO helped the hub come to fruition?
Yeah, so the COO it played a crucial role, not just in funding, but actively supporting our vision from the get. Their long-term investment allowed White Center to develop the essential skills to become the community development agency to lead this project. So it wasn't us just finding outsiders and bringing them in, but it was us leading the project. It allowed us to become a community-led developer and not have to rely on outsiders. To me, CO stands as a prime example for how local government and philanthropic entities can collaborate with nonprofits to support these community-led initiatives. By supporting both the research and development piece of this, CO has helped identify all the different gaps and the pitfalls that communities might face when trying to get this project off the ground. And maybe they didn't give us money directly, but they helped us connect to the right resources and the right people so that we could make sure this project could actually get to groundbreaking.
Yeah, I think that's so great, Aaron. And I think one of the things that I would say to other local governments or philanthropic partners here is that often we're really focused on funding the thing, and we fail to fund the capacity in organizations who are going to make the thing work. And so that's what we really tried to flip around with communities of opportunity, is making that long-term commitment to partners like you to really have the support in the community to make something work and respond to community needs. I think we're a little bit after 1. Aaron, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with us about how it might feel different within COO to work with a government versus kind of other interactions you've had with government partnerships? I know for me, on the government side, as a government employee, when I'm interacting in the COO space, it feels different to me, and I'm wondering if it feels different to you.
Absolutely. Working with CO has been it's been empowering. I think a lot of other government programs often come with rigid frameworks and predefined outcomes. To me, COO, I've used this metaphor a lot, but to me, it operates like the R&D, the research and development part of the county. They approach us with flexibility, they're ready to listen, and it allows us to be authentic collaborators with our community and center the voice of those who are the experts. And they're not so worried about risk, right? They're giving us an opportunity to do and ask the county to do things differently. And I think this openness has made CO more of a partner than a traditional funder. They act as co-creators. They help us navigate challenges and adapt solutions that truly fit community needs. And I believe this is an innovative and responsive approach that has been crucial in successfully driving projects like the Hub Project forward.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Community-led R&D. We need more of it. That's wonderful. Let's wrap up, Vincent, on kind of the formal part of our presentations here. I'm wondering, Vincent, if you have any reflections on this last conversation we had around COO.
Yes, I think thinking about COO and its connection to the presentation that we heard from David at the beginning of the webinar, it really is a strong example of how organizations can target the types of characteristics and conditions that David had mentioned, really focusing on building social capital, thriving communities to create access to opportunity for children. And I think the CEO and the work that they're doing with the White Center Hub is really illustrative of that type of work that we can do to drive community focused change, and how we can take what we see from the data and then actually translate that into action at a community level.
Yeah. And I would say, as someone working in local government, one of the things that's been really important about COO is that long-term commitment. And that can be hard to generate on political timeframes, but totally worth it. It's a legacy move, I think. And I want to underscore how much time is really needed at the outset to develop those relationships and invest in those partnerships. And it may seem like that makes it take a long time to get something to happen, but actually it's the go slow to go fast. If we hadn't invested that time in those partnerships, we wouldn't have brought so many people together. We wouldn't have formed this partnership with 2 major funders and the community that really made this happen. I'm so grateful to Aaron, Elsa, everyone behind the scenes at COO, our partners at Seattle Foundation, who have just really decided to trust each other. And as Aaron said, to take some risks and do something new, because we know the way things are working now doesn't lead to the outcomes that we want. So with that, how about we take some questions? There are a lot of questions in the chat. And let's see. Vincent, how about we start with a question to David about maybe sharing, David, you could share some examples of other places where the data has really motivated action, because I know people are really interested in that action piece. Do you have examples of other communities?
Yeah, I think this is the question we get quite often is, okay, this is very interesting, right? The map is fun to explore and you can see what's happening neighborhood by neighborhood, but what do I do with this as a local decision maker, as a policy or program leader? And we've seen it play out in a few different ways. So I think one example that we often point to is the community of Charlotte, North Carolina. When we initially did our study to map where the geography of opportunity, Charlotte ended up being 50th out of the 50 top metro areas, or most populous metro areas in terms of economic mobility prospects. And this really was a motivating call for the community of Charlotte. It sparked the city, the mayor to launch hundreds of millions of dollars of investment in opportunity initiatives. Private sector partners like Bank of America in the region also did the same. There was a kind of a backbone catalyst organization there leading on opportunity that's been organizing and leading these efforts, building out data tools locally that can measure what economic mobility looks like in more real time. The Opportunity Atlas is interesting to see what things look like, but to be able to monitor that incremental progress, they were building out locally tailored tools to be able to do that. So that's one example of how it's been a motivating catalytic engine for an area that's focused on and interested in economic mobility. We also have examples right from the Seattle area, actually. If folks are familiar with the Creating Moves to Opportunity project, this was a partnership with the local housing authorities that was trying to test simple, cost-effective interventions to be able to support low-income families with housing vouchers to be able to improve their geographic choice in the region. If you look traditionally at where families with vouchers tend to lease up, it's usually in the lower opportunity, higher poverty concentration areas of the county. And we talk a lot about that economic connectedness and the exposure factor and just the opportunity generally that you see in the region. If you're not able to access those parts of the county for whatever reason, even though the subsidy, the housing subsidy that the federal government spends a lot of money on, would allow you to do that, we were trying to understand why, right? Why don't we have more geographic choice for this particular housing resource? And so that study led to replication efforts nationally by HUD and has informed lots of other federal housing policy in recent years.
Yeah, that's great.
David, maybe go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Vincent. Go ahead.
David, maybe a related question for you here from Sarah are whether or not we have examples of specific interventions that can improve economic mobility on a local agency or a nonprofit budget level, given that some of these bigger level policy changes that might happen at the federal or state level would be out of reach for folks on the call. And I know you mentioned the Creating Moves to Opportunity intervention as one example. Have there been any other types of promising interventions that you think that folks on the call should know about?
Yeah, I think another kind of component of working in the field of economic mobility as an organization is that lots of organizations don't necessarily identify as an economic mobility organization, right? Like they're a early childhood learning facility, or they're a workforce development organization, or after school programming or something like that. So really finding how the work that you do fits into this puzzle. And we talked about those different factors of higher opportunity neighborhoods, education being one of those, reducing poverty rates within an area. So how do we do those things? We looked at also in the Opportunity Atlas work, the rates of kind of economic growth in areas, so jobs in areas, and how that's changed over time relative to mobility. And it turns out that there's not a whole lot of connection there from a economic and jobs perspective. If you have a booming region at the time, we saw Charlotte and Atlanta, tremendous economic growth that was happening in those cities, yet they ended up being at the bottom of the list in terms of opportunity for low-income kids. So what's missing there, right? It's the connection to those opportunities that provide really high-paying, good jobs for the residents of those communities. What we saw was that when we saw economic growth and bringing jobs to regions, we were also importing talent from other areas. So it wasn't going to the folks that are from and live in these communities, From a workforce perspective, being intentional about making those connections, providing the opportunity for internship, mentorship, that give children from your community the opportunity to pursue those types of pathways. I think there's lots of examples, and really finding your niche and how you connect to the broader puzzle of economic mobility is just really the key question.
Yeah. And I'll put in another pitch here for Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog. I just put a link in the chat for that. That catalog is amazing. It includes a lot of case studies from all around the country of places that have invested in interventions at the local level to enhance economic mobility. And you can search by like subject area. It's a really amazing resource. I want to pick up, we've talked quite a bit now about how do you put this into practice? There's another question in the chat from Tabi, and I hope I'm getting your name right. How can a nonprofit agency help change a low resource family's understanding of the systemic middle income hidden language when they don't have any modeling or experience with that middle class experience? And I'm wondering if I feel like that was a little bit part of our intent in that King County and the Seattle Foundation are really coming into that partnership as these big institutional partners. And part of our job is to break down those barriers, be investing in the capacity of nonprofit organizations so that they are able to learn and share with each other about how you um, manage these systems. And then we, as the big institutional partners, are trying to break through some of those systems alongside them. Aaron or Elsa, is there anything else along those lines that you want to share from your experience?
I think you touched on what we have heard from community, which is trust us, let us lead because we know what the problems are. And we have been here for as long as these problems have been here. And so trust us and invest in us and invest in the solutions that we are proposing. And then support us. Don't just let us hang in here. Support us for a long time because as we can see, which I love this presentation, you know, the change happens over time and you cannot just do 2-year cycle funding, right? And the commitment to invest in building that strength and in that what we call community power to build that capacity in our communities to identify, prioritize the problems. I think that's what we've heard is what we need to do. And so I'm happy that we get the space to share because it's not just communities, because communities already know what the problem is, but it's whoever is providing resources. We need to come together and partner and create that connectedness that is needed too, right?
And I'll just quickly share, affordable housing isn't my background. I used to do a lot of youth programming, but when you trust us, when you invest in us, we can do, this is just glorified project management. I can learn it. I can go to conferences. I can figure out how to do it and then lead the community around it. So just trust us.
That's so great. And I do really want to underscore one thing, maybe, Vincent, as we wrap this up. We've talked a lot about the benefit of for low income kids being in a high opportunity neighborhood. I want to really underscore, though, that it's a benefit for everybody of having that diverse set of connections and friends. Like our relationship in COO, it's not about just the county giving to the community. The community is helping educate us. The community has expertise that we need to do our job better, to make the use of public funds work better. So it's very much an equal partnership.
Yeah, Carrie, I couldn't agree more. I think even as an organization that conducts research to identify effective solutions, our research is most powerful when folks from the community are true partners in designing the research question and helping us to execute the research, because some of the most important questions we as researchers within an academic center might not even be thinking about. And I think when we ensure that everybody has an equal seat at the table, there's just so much learning that can happen all around. I think today's presentation really emphasized the importance and value of using high quality data to understand trends related to economic mobility, both the national level, but also at the hyper local level. And we also were able to hear about a really encouraging and energizing example of how that community change is actually happening at the local level.
Yeah, I loved being part of this conversation and really want to thank everybody for jumping in on it. I do think it's a really important conversation to have right now. Thanks so much.